Wyoming Territory, autumn of 1878. The wind dragged across the plains like it had nowhere else to go, lifting dust in long, lazy twists across the yard of the old farmhouse. The porch creaked under the weight of silence, and in the middle of it sat a woman in a rocking chair, staring at nothing. Celia Mae Morgan had not moved in over an hour. The chair rocked slow, steady, the wind pulling strands of her chestnut hair from the loose knot at her neck. Her hands rested in her lap, one over the other. She was 31, a widow, though the word felt too clean for what had happened. Her husband had gone off to help a neighbor with a fence post and never come back, shot dead over a broken pocket watch and 3 angry words. That had been 2 years ago. Then last spring, both of her children, Zeke, age 8, and Zoe, just 6, had been taken west by her husband's brother and never brought back. He had promised work, better schooling, said he'd write. He never did, so now she sat, not really waiting, not really hoping, just staring. The screen door creaked open behind her. She did not turn, bootsteps crossed the porch and paused. Then the sound of wood shifting as someone lowered himself into the second rocker beside her. "I'll wait," the man said. She blinked once, then again. Her eyes stayed forward. "For what? For however long it takes you to look at me." His voice was low, rough from dust and trail miles, but kind. Familiar somehow. Celia turned her head just slightly. The man was tall, lean, with sun-darkened skin and a strong jaw. His hair was dark gold, a little too long, tucked under a wide-brimmed hat. He looked like he belonged to the land. His boots were scuffed, his shirt dusty, but his eyes deep green and steady held something she had not seen in a long while. Recognition stirred slowly in her chest. "Do I know you?" she asked. He pulled his hat off, resting it on his knee. "You might. I rode through here once, nearly 10 years back, helped your husband dig a new well. You were carrying Zeke on your hip." She studied him harder, a flicker of memory pulling forward. "You are Franklin," she said slowly. "Franklin Shaw," he nodded. "Just Frank. I remember. You barely said 5 words the whole time." "I had not learned yet how to talk to someone like you." She raised an eyebrow. "Someone like me," he leaned back in the chair, letting it creak beneath him. "Someone whose eyes could knock the wind out of a man." Celia let out a breath through her nose, the closest thing she had come to a laugh in weeks. "You always been that bold." "No, but I figure life's too short not to say what matters. Especially out here." Silence settled again, but it was not the same kind as before. This one had shape to it. Warmth. "What are you doing here, Frank?" she asked, looking for work. Heading toward Laramie, saw the house, remembered the well. "Thought I would stop and see if anyone was still breathing here." Celia looked down at her hands. "Barely." His fingers twitched against his knee like he wanted to reach for her but did not dare. "I heard about your husband," he said. "And the children?" Her throat tightened. "You heard? I passed through Rock Springs last spring. Ran into a man who said his name was Morgan, had 2 children with him. Said they were his brothers and he had taken them west for a fresh start." Her head snapped toward him. "You saw them," he nodded. "They were thin but safe." "The boy had your eyes." Celia's hands gripped the arms of the chair. "Where were they?" "Just outside Cheyenne. They were heading into Colorado." She stared at him, heart thudding. "Why did you not bring them back?" "I was just a stranger then," he said softly. "But I am not anymore. I can go after them if you want." She stood suddenly, rocking chair hitting the porch behind her. "You would do that?" "I would do more than that," he said, rising. "If you let me." Her breath caught. She looked at him for a long moment, then turned and walked down the porch steps. He followed. They walked past the barn, past the fence where the grass had grown too tall, and into the field where the last of the sun was dropping behind the hills. The wind had quieted. Only the sound of boots in dry grass remained. Celia stopped and turned toward him. "Why would you help me, Frank?" "Why now?" He looked at her. No smile, no charm, just honesty. "Because I remember the way you looked at your babies. Because I remember how you hummed to them even when your hands were raw from scrubbing. And because I have not been able to forget you since." Her throat closed, but not with pain this time, with something else, something she had not felt in years. "You do not owe me anything," she said. "I know," he said. "That is why it matters." Then she did something she had not done in a long time. She stepped forward and rested her forehead against his chest. His arms moved around her, careful, like she might break. She did not pull away. That night, she made stew for the first time in months. He sat across from her at the table, his hands warm around the tin cup of coffee she poured him. When he smiled, it reached his eyes. "I will leave at dawn," he said. "Go after them." "I want to come," she said. "I need to," he nodded. "Then we ride together." She looked at him, really looked. "Thank you, Frank," he shook his head. "Do not thank me yet, we still have a long road ahead." But she smiled, because for the first time in a long while, the road did not feel so lonely. He stayed up late that night to patch one of the broken saddles. She watched from the doorway, arms crossed, heart lighter than it had been in 2 years. And as she turned to go inside, she heard him say softly behind her, "I'll wait. However long it takes." Celia paused, the words holding her still. She did not say anything back, but she smiled. The morning came cold and colorless. Frost clung to the grass, fine and silver, and the horses exhaled steam into the still air. Celia stood by the gate, fastening her cloak, the wool stiff at the collar from disuse. She hadn't worn it since the last snow fell, back before the silence had settled in her bones. Frank adjusted the cinch on his gelding, checking the saddle bags twice. He didn't speak, didn't glance her way, but his awareness of her was constant, like the way a man knows the shape of the sky behind him. "I packed dried beans," she said, securing the last strap on her mare. "And salt pork. There's some cornmeal too, if you don't mind it a little weeviled." He nodded. "We'll keep warm meals when we can. I've traps in the bedroll if we need fresh meat." Her hands paused at the reins. "You trap, only what I eat." "I don't see sense in waste." They rode west by Sun Angle, cutting across the open basin toward Elk Mountain. The land stretched wide, an unbroken sparse willow near the creek beds, the occasional jackrabbit darting through sage. The silence between them was not the heavy kind she'd known before, but the sort that let a person breathe. By noon, they stopped in the shadow of a cottonwood. She handed him a strip of dried apple and took one for herself. "You ever been to Colorado?" she asked. "Once. Winter of '74. Took a job hauling freight from Golden to the mines. Hard living," he chewed, then nodded. "Harder than most want to admit. Men froze standing." She looked out at the mountains in the distance. "My brother-in-law mentioned a town near Trinidad." That's all he said. Frank wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "He'll be south of that now if he's still moving. There's ranch country stretching into Raton Pass. Could be hired on somewhere." She studied him. "You talk like you've lived all over." "I never settled long." "Not till now." That made her glance away. She didn't know what to do with that kind of answer yet. By dusk, they reached a dry creek and made camp beneath a bluff. She gathered what little brushwood she could find while he unsaddled the horses. When she returned with an armful of twigs, he had already struck flint to steel, coaxing flame from a bit of rag. "I'm not helpless," she said, setting the wood down. "I never thought you were." She sat cross-legged across from him, warming her hands near the fire. Her palms were rougher than they used to be. Everything about her was. He cleared his throat and reached into his coat pocket. "I brought something, wasn't sure if I should." He held out a folded scrap of paper. She hesitated, then took it. The handwriting was crooked but careful, a child's hand. "Dear Uncle Frank, Mama said not to bother you, but I wanted to say thank you for the whistle. I still got it. Zoe tries to steal it when I'm sleeping. I miss home." Celia folded the paper slowly, running her fingers along the edge. "When did he give you this?" "Spring last year." Before they left the homestead near Cheyenne, she held the paper tight in her lap. "I didn't know they even remembered me." "They do." The fire crackled low between them. She didn't look up. "I was angry for a long time," she said. "At everyone. At myself most of all. You had cause. I let him take them. I told myself it was just for a season. I thought I'd have time to make things right." Frank added a stick to the fire, watching the flames. "You still do." She looked at him then, the firelight catching the planes of his face. "How can you be so sure?" He met her gaze. "Because I know what it means to come back from nothing." She didn't ask what he meant. Whatever it was, it lived behind his eyes, and she wasn't ready to touch it yet. That night, she lay curled beneath her blanket, the folded note pressed under her palm. Across the fire, he slept with one hand resting lightly on the butt of his revolver. The stars burned sharp above them, no clouds, no moon, just the raw sweep of heaven overhead. She didn't sleep right away. She listened to the horses shift, to the wind brushing through brittle grass, and to the slow, measured rhythm of Frank Shaw's breathing. She hadn't known peace could ride beside such ache. But for the first time, she believed it might carry her forward. They crossed into Colorado 2 days later, following faint wagon ruts where the soil turned red and the sage grew low and brittle. The land pitched and rolled, no longer the open sweep of plains but a quilt of ridges and winding trails. By then, Celia's mare had developed a limp that made her ride awkward, and Frank slowed his pace without being told, she noticed. He didn't speak on it. That morning, the sky had softened with cloud, and the sun stayed hidden behind a dull gray stretch. They hadn't seen another soul since leaving the last homestead near the border, though once in the distance, a hawk circled low over something unseen in the grass and vanished. They stopped near a dry arroyo to water the horses. Frank crouched beside the mare's foreleg, running his fingers along the tendon. "She's strained it," he said. "Too many miles on ground like this." "I'll walk," Celia offered. "No, we'll rest her. No point rushing into terrain we don't know." She didn't argue. She had started to understand that silence with Frank meant something different than it had with others. His quiet wasn't a shutting out, but a kind of steady presence. He didn't fill space just to fill it, and when he did speak, it carried weight. They sat together under a twisted juniper tree, sharing the last of the dried meat. Celia pulled a small bundle from her saddlebag, 2 pieces of cloth, carefully wrapped, the corners frayed. "My daughter used to carry this," she said, unfolding the smaller piece. Inside was a carved button with a painted bird on it, faded from wear. She called it her lucky bird, said it could find anything that got lost. Frank looked at it, then back at her. "You kept it. I couldn't throw it away. Even after I stopped believing it would help." He reached over, not touching, but close. "You believe it now? I don't know," she said. "But I brought it anyway." They sat without speaking for a while. The wind had picked up again, low and steady, bending the grasses at the base of the ridge. Frank pulled something from his coat pocket, a narrow, worn book, the spine stitched by hand. He passed it to her. "This belonged to my sister," he said. "She taught me my letters with it. I carry it when I travel." Celia turned the pages slowly. The ink was faded but neat. "Poems in long, looping script. She died," she asked. He nodded. "Long before she should have. Fever took her the same winter our father drank himself to death." She closed the book and handed it back. "Why give it to me?" "I didn't," he said. "I just wanted you to hold it." That night they made camp in a narrow pass, the fire small and shielded by rock. Celia stitched the torn corner of her saddlebag while Frank sharpened his knife against a whetstone, the scrape rhythmic and clean. "Do you think they're safe?" she asked. "I think they're waiting," he said. "Even if they don't know it." She rested the needle, watching him work. "You always talk like you know what people are feeling." "I don't," he said. "I just listen." She leaned back on her elbows, her eyes on the dark line of sky above the canyon. "I used to think I was strong. Thought I could hold everything together if I just worked hard enough. You are strong, not like I was." "Maybe not," Frank said, sliding the knife into its sheath, "but stronger in ways that matter more now." She didn't reply, but he could see her breathing shift, like something inside her had let go a little. Later, when the fire had burned low and the stars returned, she lay on her side facing him. His hat was pulled low over his brow, but she could see he wasn't asleep. "You never said why you stayed on the porch that day," she said. "I didn't need to say it. Say it now." He turned his head toward her, his voice quiet but firm, "Because I saw someone trying to disappear and I wasn't ready to let her." Celia didn't look away. "And now I want to see where you go if you're not fading anymore." The fire cracked softly between them. Then she reached across the space, her fingertips brushing his wrist, not asking, just saying she was there, and he didn't move away. By the 5th day, they reached the edge of the Raton foothills, where the trails narrowed and the scent of piñon sap clung to the air. The horses had slowed, not from lameness but caution instinct reading the land better than words could. Frank led them through a dry draw, his hand resting loose on the reins, eyes scanning the ridgelines above. Celia rode a few paces behind. Her posture had changed. She sat straighter in the saddle now, not with pride but readiness. They stopped near a stand of junipers where a rusted wagon wheel lay half buried in the dirt. Frank dismounted and knelt, brushing away debris. "Recent tracks," he said. Celia slid from her mare and walked over, squinting down at the impressions. Is it them? Too many boot prints to tell for sure, but there's a child's step here, small heel, lightweight. Could match. She crouched beside him. Do they look hurried? No, steady pace. Might mean they've settled somewhere close. She stood, brushing dust from her palms. Then we keep going. Frank rose, but didn't move toward the horses. Instead, he pulled a folded square of cloth from his pack, unwrapping it to reveal a tin badge dulled with age. I took work once guarding a supply line through these passes. Man I worked for gave me this, not official law, just something to make folks think twice. Celia studied it, then looked up. Why bring it now? If we find the children, we may need to speak with men who don't want to be spoken to. Sometimes false authority keeps tempers down. She looked at the badge a long moment. You ever use it before? Only once. Talked a man out of gutting a drunk over a mule. She gave a slow nod. Then I hope we won't need it. By dusk, they reached a cluster of cabins near a shallow creek. Smoke curled from 2 chimneys. A boy sat on a crate outside the furthest home, whittling a stick. Frank approached first, reins in hand. Evenin', the boy didn't look up. You lost. No, Frank said. Looking for a man named Morgan. Traveled with 2 children, a boy and a girl. The boy paused. Mr. Morgan's over at the stables. He's got the little ones with him. Celia stepped forward. Are they safe? The boy finally looked at her. They don't act hurt, if that's what you mean. She turned to Frank. I need to see them. He nodded. They left the horses at a post near the creek and crossed the field on foot. The stables stood low and squat, the roof patched with mismatched shingles. Inside, the scent of straw and horse sweat hung thick. A lantern burned low near the far wall. Celia stopped at the threshold. Frank leaned in close. You want me to go first? No, she said. This part's mine. She stepped inside. A man stood near the stalls, combing burrs from a chestnut's mane. His beard had grown in uneven, and his shirt was stained with oil and hay. 2 children sat on a blanket nearby, sorting marbles. Celia's voice steadied. Zeke, Zoe. The boy looked up first. His hand froze mid-reach. The girl turned slower, her face unreadable. Mama, Celia's knees buckled, but she caught herself. Zeke stood. Mama, is that really you? She dropped beside them, arms open. I'm here now. They ran to her, both at once, burying their faces in her coat. She held them close, her breath ragged. Behind them, the man her brother-in-law watched, silent. You came, he said flatly. She looked up, eyes wet. You didn't leave me away to do anything else. I wrote once, thought it'd be better this way. Frank stepped into the doorway, quiet as ever. The man's eyes flicked toward him. This him? Celia stood slowly, arms still wrapped around her children. This is Frank. He brought me here. The man tossed the comb onto a stool. You want to take them? They're mine. He shrugged. They never stopped asking for you. I didn't know how to answer. You could have brought them back. I thought I was doing right. Frank's voice slid into the silence. Are you saying different now? The man looked from Frank to Celia, then knelt by the blanket. I never meant to keep him forever, just didn't want them to see her like she was. After Thomas died, Celia's voice broke, but she steadied it. You don't get to decide what they see. They're my blood. You took them without asking, and now I'm taking them home. He rubbed a hand over his mouth. You got a place for him. You got food. Yes, she said. And more than that, I've got the will. He nodded, the fight gone from him. Then take him. Zeke held her hand so tight her fingers ached. They walked out into the dusk together, the children between them. Frank waited by the horses, adjusting the saddles to bear the extra weight. He didn't ask what was said. He didn't need to. Celia stopped beside him. We'll need to ride slow. I figured. She looked down at her children, then up at him. You didn't have to do this. I know. But you did. He met her eyes. I told you I'd wait, she swallowed. Not waiting anymore. No, he said. Now we ride forward. The sun had dropped behind the hills, and the stars blinked out one by one. Celia lifted Zoe into the saddle and took the reins of her mare. Zeke climbed up behind Frank, arms wrapped around his waist like he belonged there. They turned east toward Wyoming, toward home. The journey home took longer than the ride out. Celia's mare bore the weight of Zoe carefully, but they stopped more often now once to let the girl stretch her legs, again when Zeke grew too drowsy to balance behind Frank. There was no rush. Every mile brought them closer to what had once been lost, and each night by the fire, the shape of their life began to settle into something real. On the second evening, they camped near a shallow bend in the Little Medicine Bow River. The children slept nestled together beneath Celia's wool cloak, Zoe's fingers curled around the painted bird button, Zeke's head resting lightly on his sister's shoulder. Frank sat across the fire, oiling his saddle cinch with quiet care. Celia crouched beside the bedrolls, brushing a stray hair from her son's brow. When she rose, she didn't return to her blanket. Instead, she walked to Frank and lowered herself beside him, her skirt brushing his boot. "I've been thinking," she said, watching the sparks drift upward before vanishing. "It's not just about getting them home." "No," Frank said, "it isn't. I don't want them growing up quiet and afraid. I want them to feel safe enough to laugh again." He nodded, working the oil into the leather. "Then they'll need more than shelter." Celia glanced at him. "You think I can't give them that? I think you can give them most anything. I just wonder if you plan to do it alone." She didn't answer at first. The fire cracked, and somewhere across the river an owl called low. "I was alone for so long," she said finally, "even before Thomas died. I got used to the weight. I know the feeling." She turned toward him. "But I don't want to carry it anymore." Frank laid the cloth over the tin and set it aside. "Then don't. I don't know what comes next. You don't have to, just let it come." She looked at the fire, then back at him. "You'd stay, if you asked." Her hand found his in the space between them. It wasn't a question. It was a beginning. They reached the homestead near dusk 5 days later. The porch leaned a little more than she remembered, and the barn door hung slightly off its hinge, but it was home. The children stood still in the yard, taking it in. Zeke reached for his sister's hand. Celia knelt beside them. "It's ours again. You can run, shout, grow loud as you like." Zoe's eyes widened. "Even in the house, especially there." The girl giggled. Zeke grinned. Then they tore off toward the porch, dust flying behind them. Frank stood by the gate, watching. "They'll fill the walls again. They already have." That night, after the children had climbed into the old rope bed and fallen asleep tangled in each other's limbs, Celia stepped out onto the porch. The wind was gentle, the kind that whispered instead of carrying things away. She found Frank sitting on the top step, sharpening a fence nail with his pocket knife. She sat beside him, knees drawn up, arms wrapped lightly around them. "I cleared the back room," she said. "The one that used to hold the seed sacks." He looked over. "For what?" She rested her chin on her knee. "Someone who might need a place to stay. Someone who's already fixed the tack, patched the roof, and taught my son to fish with a twig and string." Frank set the nail aside. "I'd rather sleep by the stove." She tilted her head. "It gets hot in there." "I don't mind heat." She laughed softly. "You want to stay? I already have." The moonlight touched her cheek, pale and quiet. She leaned into him, her shoulder against his. "I didn't think I'd feel this again," she whispered. "What's that?" "Hope. And something else, too, something steadier." Frank's hand found hers, fingers interlacing with gentle certainty. "You don't have to name it," he said. "Just let it stay." She turned to him, eyes searching his face. "You're not going to disappear, are you?" "No," he said. "Not unless you ask me to. I won't." Then she kissed him, slow and certain, the kind of kiss that roots itself deep and will not be moved. He kissed her back, not with urgency, but with the weight of every mile they'd ridden, every silence they'd kept, every choice that had led them here. When they parted, she stayed close, her forehead resting against his. "We're going to be all right," she said. "We already are." Years passed. The prairie grass grew tall again behind the barn, and Frank built a new fence that held through 3 winters. Celia kept a garden that stretched wide with onions, cabbage, and late beans. Zoe learned to ride bareback and always came home with her dress in tatters, while Zeke built wind toys out of scrap wood and taught himself to carve birds with wings that turned in the breeze. Frank never left. He added a porch swing, redug the well, and built a cradle when Celia's belly began to swell during the second spring. They married quiet, with just the preacher from Laramie and the children looking on. Celia wore her hair loose, and Frank gave her a ring carved from cherry wood until they could afford silver. There were hard days still. Droughts that browned the fields, colds that swept through in winter, but they met them together. And when the nights grew long, and the house held the soft breathing of children and the scent of firewood and stew, they would sit on the porch, side by side, their hands still finding each other without thought. Celia never forgot the silence that had once filled her life. But it was gone now, replaced by the sound of laughter, the creak of saddle leather, the rustle of quilts in the morning, and Frank's voice, steady as the land beneath them, always saying, "I'm here." He always was.